Hey guys, here over American Crime Story, the Assassination of Gianni Versace, Episode 2, Manhunt, and I was definitely really looking forward to this episode. As you guys know, I really did enjoy last week's premiere. It was definitely different from the first season, but that's actually what very much did intrigue me, is the smaller scale story. Also, the Memento-esque style I really did love. I was really looking forward to seeing the way the rest of the season would go, and while this episode wasn't as good as the first one, I did still think this was a pretty solid episode overall. There was a lot of great moments throughout this episode, but let's just get into it. I definitely do want to talk about it, and if there's one thing that I do think this episode did live up to is, the title character, because Versace was not in the first episode a lot, and especially, characters like Antonio and Donatella, they were not in the first episode a lot. This one definitely gave you a lot more of that family, and I definitely did like seeing that. We start off actually in Miami of March 1994, and we see Versace. He's attempting to conceal his identity from any lurking paparazzi, because again, as we know, he doesn't really want to be famous. He just kind of wants to be a normal person, and he just wants to be treated as such. But him and Antonio visit a doctor, blood is drawn, and he's informed that there are drug therapies that can help him. It's not stated that he's HIV positive, however, it is in fact implied. And we get this really great scene where he talks about how him and Donatella had this conversation once about sickness, and I really thought Edgar Ramirez did a very good job in this scene. But the person I think that carried this entire episode was Penelope Cruz. Penelope Cruz absolutely dominated this episode. Every scene she was in, she just completely stole. And Donatella visits her sick brother at his home, getting emotional at the possible loss of her sibling. Basically, after speaking to Versace, we see, she doesn't really know how she's going to be able to go on with him, because everything she's done has pretty much been for Versace, and she and Antonio then have a talk. She blames him for bringing other men into her brother's life, and Antonio's lifestyle caused Versace's illness, and Donatella believes that Versace only went along with Antonio's lifestyle because he loved Antonio, and she doesn't forgive Anthony for his choices. She wants to know why Antonio didn't give Versace the family he wanted, and Antonio claims it was simply because they weren't allowed to have one, and that is true at that time. There weren't gay marriages, there weren't really gay weddings, things like that. It just was kind of unheard of. It wasn't really something that happened a lot back then, and it's obvious that Donatella has no respect for Antonio. She doesn't approve of her brother's relationship, and I did really enjoy this scene. You can see, we saw last week that her and Antonio really don't get along well at all, but even before Versace's passing, it was pretty much just as bad. Was very interesting to see. And we see a week later, Versace strolling the beach with Antonio. He's devastated by his sickness. He wants the disease out of him, and he confesses for the first time that he is jealous of healthy people. It's not that he idolizes them. He's simply jealous. He wishes that he was a lot healthier. And where Versace and Antonio return home, Versace tells his sister and Antonio he can only get better if they remain a family. So we see that, even though Donatella and Antonio don't really get along at all, he wants them to remain, one collective, he wants them to remain one unit as a family, and I really did enjoy seeing that. And again, I did think this made up for the lack of those characters that we got, in the first episode. I like seeing a lot more of them here, and luckily this is not the last scene we see them, because we then flash forward to July 16, 1997, where Donatella is crying. She watches admirers lay flowers outside her brother's mansion on the spot where he was brutally murdered, and she tells Antonio that she's done pretending that they're family. Obviously, Versace wanted to do that, but now that Versace's not around, she doesn't have to do that. She's forging that promise, and Versace's body is then prepared for viewing. Later, Donatella arrives to be with her brother, who's laid out in his coffin. She places him in a new suit and tie, lovingly handling his body as she dresses him. Crying, she kisses his forehead, and it's a very emotional scene. You can tell this is obviously very hard for Donatella. She doesn't want to do this, but Versace's quickly cremated, his ashes prepared to be taken home to Italy by Donatella and Santo Versace, and on the plane, Donatella doesn't understand how Versace could have survived being ill, only be gunned down in front of his own home. She does not understand how this happened to him, and you can just tell how perplexed she is. They really thought that the HIV was going to get to him, but it didn't. He was able to beat it, and now, unfortunately, he did die. And I did like this. I thought this gave a lot of context, towards the family overall. It shows that it's one of those things where just their life was changed in the blink of an eye, and I really did enjoy seeing that here overall. However, as good as that setup was, I thought that we were going to go back to that at some point. As far as this episode, though, we don't go back to that. The rest of this episode pretty much focuses on Andrew. We see the scene shifts back to May 1997 in Florence, South Carolina. Andrew's purchasing items, including a screwdriver at Walmart. He uses the screwdriver to steal the license plate off another car in the parking lot. He places it on his truck. He drives away, changing radio stations, pausing briefly to listen to a news report that he's a suspect in the murder of Lee Miglin. Now, we don't actually get that murder in this episode. We're going to get that next week, but the report doesn't bother him. He sings loudly along with the radio as he drives to Miami, and he checks into the Normandy Plaza, which seems to be a low-budget hotel on the beach. He used the French passport as a form of an ID, claiming to be this guy named Kurt de Mars, and he reveals he's there to have a conversation with Versace, saying that he's a fashion student. And that evening, Andrew makes his way to Versace's mansion, tries the front gate, it's locked, and he stares briefly through the bars before leaving. He then buys disguised sunglasses and a red baseball cap along with a disposable camera. He then takes pictures on the front of Versace's mansion, laying the photos out on the ground in his hotel room, checks his wallet, and it's almost empty. So he's got like no money. We see that he really is not prepared for this. And over at the Miami police station, the FBI discuss Andrew's 4 murder victims with Miami detective Lori Welder, who I thought Dasha Polanco, as small as her role was here, did a really great job here. They're in town to warn the Miami police that Andrew could be headed their way. The FBI have reason to believe that Andrew will be in town, and Detective Weeder points out the popular gay clubs on the map. She offers to take the agents to a local bar and introduce them to the owners and community leaders, believing that they can check all the clubs out in just one day. So Agent Evans explains that Andrew doesn't visit the clubs and instead targets closeted, wealthy, older men. So a lack of FBI wanted posters means there are only 10 available for South Beach, and Agent Evans then thinks Fort Lauderdale bars may be a more likely place for someone to spot Andrew. That's definitely where he would be. So the flyers aren't a priority for the FBI, so Detective Weeder makes her own copy to put up in the station just so they have this, they have him out there and that they will be able to track him down. So I did think this was interesting that we went back to 1997 and saw how they were going after Andrew, but the first episode made it seem like this was going to focus primarily on Versace's murder and them trying to catch him for that, and this episode that wasn't the case. So back at his hotel, Andrew doesn't like the view from his hotel room, and after practicing his speech in a mirror, he convinces the hotel manager to give him a room with an ocean view. Andrew gets his wish, and he's moved up to room 322, a room with a fantastic view. He steps outside and talks to Ronnie, played by Max Greenfield, who, let me just say, I thought did a phenomenal job here. I really did love Max Greenfield in this role. I hope we see more of him because he really was great here. He asked him if he knows where to score. Andrew says he volunteered in an AIDS awareness initiative and he's not sick, but he knows Ronnie is. And Ronnie missed that he was close to dying a few years ago. Then he got magic pills and he's no longer feeling ill. So they continue talking. Andrew claims he's a friend of Versace's and he helped him with his costumes for an opera in San Francisco. He also lies and says that Versace proposed to him, but he turned him down. Again, he's continuing to, all the web of lies that Andrew Cunanan was quite famous for. But Andrew and Ryan then take a spot on the beach. An older man checks out Andrew. Andrew then walks over, whispers in his ear. Shortly thereafter, they arrive at the man's hotel room where Andrew learns the gentleman employs 5,000 people globally, and the stranger promises that he can be submissive. But of course, to Andrew, this is an invitation for something a lot darker. We see the man allows Andrew to wrap his head in tape, not protesting until Andrew tapes up his nose and mouth. This scene was genuinely terrifying. I mean, just the fact that he literally tapes his entire face up until this guy basically couldn't breathe. He whispers that the man is helpless and he better accept it. He dances as the man struggles to remove the tape, and this whole scene reminded me of American Psycho. We all know the classic scene where, Patrick Bateman is murdering that one dude to hip to be square. This very much reminded me of that. That whole scene. He refused to cut open a hole until the man stops moving, accepts that he's powerless, and when the man finally relaxes, Andrew cuts open a hole in the tape, covering the man's mouth, and thank God that guy lived. I thought Andrew was just gonna kill that guy right then and there, but that was definitely a terrifying scene. It shows how menacing Andrew really is, and Darren Criss definitely very much impressed me there. He was creepy. He was very, like I said, menacing, and I really did love the way that scene was constructed. So Andrew eats a delicious lunch delivered by room service as the man stands in the corner of the room, and after Andrew finishes and leaves, the man calls 911, but then doesn't actually report what happened. Now, why he doesn't do this, I don't know. I guess he just thinks that Andrew is kind of unbeatable. I mean, I don't really understand. Why didn't he just call 911? I don't understand why he didn't do that. That didn't really make a ton of sense to me, but... Now, at this point, I thought we were going to cut back to 1997 when Versace was murdered, but like I said, we don't do that. Instead, we get something completely unrelated, still just as interesting, but like I said, completely unrelated to the murder overall. We see Gianni and Antonio are backstage as models prepares for a fashion show, and Versace tells Antonio he doesn't like these models. They're so skinny when they look ill, and when Donatella arrives, Versace says the models look like they don't eat or enjoy life, and Donatella believes that these models are the ones who get the front covers, and Versace wonders if she means his work isn't enough to get the front covers on its own merits anymore. And Donatello tells her brothers his designs have grown old, and people are saying that he's repeating what's worked for him in the past. And Versace explains how he's happy and grateful to be alive, but there might be a time in the future where he can create a show that's morbid, just as she desires. And I really like their conflicting ideals in this scene. I thought this was definitely very interesting. So Versace continues saying life is special, and his clothes should simply make people feel that way. But you can tell Donatella is a lot more of a materialist in that way. She's much more focused on the money and what sells well. Well, you can tell that, you know, you can tell that Versace is much more interested in the feelings and how people, you know, should, what clothes should really do for someone and the textures and things like that. So at the hotel, we see Andrew and Ronnie get high. Ronnie starts laughing. Andrew runs to the bathroom. He tapes up his own head while Ronnie talks through the door, asking if he wants to run a flower shop together. Ronnie's taken aback when Andrew opens the bathroom door with his face covered in tape, and the bathroom wall is then covered in photos of Versace's mansion. After the shower, Ronnie asks Andrew what he did to that man from the beach. Andrew claims to have done nothing. So Versace then sketches while Antonio's in bed with another man having sex. Versace promises to join them later, and the next morning Versace swims up to Antonio, who's seated on the edge of the pool. Antonio surprises his lover by telling him he doesn't want any man anymore and wants to get married. And Versace thinks he'll change his mind come nighttime. So basically, you could tell that even Versace didn't feel that Antonio truly loved him. He felt like Antonio just, you know, bounced from him to different men and never really had that connection that I think Versace really, you know, wanted them to have and that Antonio believed that they have. So Andrew pays a visit to the pawn shop. He fills out forms, completing them using his real name. The owner of the shop then glanced at the wanted posters, and of course there isn't one of Andrew Cunanan since the FBI didn't spread them out in Miami Beach. So Andrew completes the required form, giving his room number as 205. Later, Andrew's walking near Versace's mansion. He sees a fake Donatella attempting to get into the mansion, and again, we can just see that Versace was so adorned and it was such in high demand with these, you know, certain designs that people would literally, you know, go, you know, basically go onto his perimeter and start screaming at him and try to get into his mansion and everything. And we see Versace appears at the window, and he tells the fake Donatella one Donatella is enough. Andrew listens. This conversation takes place. Now sure that Versace's at home, and Andrew then runs back to his hotel room. He grabs his gun. He rips down all the photos of Versace's place, leaves room 322, says goodbye to Ronnie, gives him a wad of cash. Ronnie wants to know if they were really friends and if what happened between them was real, and Andrew says that when someone asks if they were friends, he'll say no. Obviously, because Andrew knows that he is very much a wanted criminal, that people are after him, and people are going to question Ronnie, and if they do that, then that will lure them to Andrew, and obviously he doesn't want that to happen. But of course, Ronnie doesn't know about any of this. Andrew then sits in the park across from Versace's home. Versace leaves with Antonio, but Andrew misses it because they're the diner ordering takeout. The guy who takes his orders recognizes him from America's Most Wanted, and he calls the police, describing Andrew as that white guy who killed 4 other white guys. He can't remember Andrew's name, but tells the cops to send everyone immediately. Squad cars then race to the restaurant, but Andrew has fled by the time they arrive, and Gianni and Antonio go to the front of the line at the club. They're greeted by friends. They pass through the crowd and settle in. And Andrew reaches to his perch outside Versace's place. He notices Versace's bedroom lights are now off, and he then heads to Twist in search of Versace. He hurries through the club, even searching the bathroom stalls. But Antonio and Versace are outside. Antonio once again says he doesn't want that life anymore. He only wants to marry Versace. They kiss on the sidewalk outside the club, then head home. And inside the club, Andrew continues looking for Versace. A guy named Brad introduced himself, and Andrew introduced himself as simply just Andy, a serial killer. The guy laughs, and Andrew starts rattling off all these lists of odd professions, including building movie sets in Mexico. But he leaves him saying that he is the person least likely to be forgotten, and that is the way the episode ends. So, like I said, guys, I definitely really did enjoy this episode overall. There definitely is quite a lot of stuff to get into. Right off the bat, I really do like what the show is doing with Versace, because obviously we know Versace does end up dead, but Edgar Ramirez is so good in the role, and, you know, we want to give more for Donatella and Antonio. I like that they did give them a lot more stuff to do here. I really do like the conflicting ideals between Donatella and Versace, how Donatella is much more focused on what sells well, but Versace's more focused on the personal reasons why someone would purchase this clothing and what it would benefit and how it would benefit them. Like I said, Donatella is much more focused on just what sells well and the money and all that kind of stuff. So I really do like seeing that. I think their conflicting ideals is very interesting, but I also really like how Donatella kind of remained in control pretty much the entire time. I mean, even though Versace, yes, he was well known for this, Donatella was just as well known, and we see that, you know, she very much controlled a lot of stuff, especially when it comes to Antonio and Versace's relationship. She never really approved of it, and especially now that Versace's gone, she especially now doesn't approve of it and doesn't want any connection with him whatsoever. So it's sad to see, but Penelope Cruz, you know, it doesn't change the fact that she's absolutely dominating in this role, and if she doesn't get nominated for an Emmy next year, I'll be very surprised, because she's absolutely killing it, and I really do love what we're getting from her. She really is doing a fantastic job. As far as things go with Andrew, I'm a little bit confused of what the show is really trying to do here. You know, they set up him murdering Lee Miglin, but we didn't actually see the murder in this episode. I thought the show was going to go back and do that, but it looks like next week we're going to get the death of Lee Miglin and why he actually kills him. Everything with Ronnie, I did think was definitely very well set up. I like how we saw once again Andrew was, you know, pretty much lying to someone, and we didn't really know if he cared about Ronnie. That whole scene with him taping that guy's face, that was one of the highlight scenes this entire episode. I mean, Darren Criss just did such a great job portraying this merciless serial killer who will do whatever he can to get someone completely under his control, so much so as to completely, you know, just barricade them and barricade their face in tape to the point where they can't say anything and, you know, they can't even breathe. I mean, it was, again, quite horrifying to think about, and Darren Criss is really just killing in this role. He really is doing a fantastic job, I have to say. Really my biggest problem with this episode, though, is, again, as much as I did enjoy you know, a lot of stuff going on here, I enjoyed the stuff with Versace and Donatella. I enjoyed the stuff between Antonio and Donatella as well. I enjoyed all the stuff with Andrew. I just don't really know where this is going, to be honest with you. It just seems like, again, we're trying to tell, I understand we're trying to tell the story of why Andrew would kill Versace, but I just don't really know where all of this is honestly going. I thought we were going to spend more time in this episode on Versace's murder, on the FBI going after Andrew, but it looks like that's not really the case. We're going to go back and see the FBI struggle to go after Andrew, which I don't really understand why we need to see that. We already know that, you know, he's killed 4 other guys, before Versace being his 5th one, and now, because of this, you know, the FBI are in high demand to go after him, and obviously they failed. So I don't understand why we really need to be seeing this. It doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. I thought that this was going to be us going back and, you know, seeing the mindset of why Andrew would do this and getting more into his head. There was a really good scene here that I definitely really did love, where Ronnie, you know, asks Andrew what he thinks of his life and, you know, what he's really done, and Andrew says that he's done absolutely nothing his entire life. And again, it does show that there was that vulnerability in him, that this was just a normal guy who tried to shape his life into something much more fantastical and interesting, when in reality he was just his life was just very mundane and not really that exciting at all. And you could tell that these killings very much gave him some sort of purpose, and I think that's really why he killed. And I do find that stuff very endlessly compelling, as well as Versace and Donatella. I find their relationship compelling, but again, we have 6 episodes left, and I just don't really know where exactly this is going to go. I don't understand really where we're going or the rest of the season. I don't know if it's really going to flow as well as it should, so I just don't know if this specific approach, the whole going back in time, was the best way to do it. I don't know if they're really doing this right. We'll just have to see the way the rest of the season goes, but just in general, I don't really know where we're headed for the rest of the season. But other than that, guys, I still really did enjoy this episode. I still thought this had some really strong moments overall, and I am going to give episode 2 of American Crime Story, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, episode 2, Manhunt, a B. So over, guys, from this episode of American Crime Story, The Assassination of Gianni Versace. Let me know what you guys thought of this episode overall. Love your thoughts on it. Like I said, definitely enjoying the season. I'm just very confused as to where we really do go from here, because the show really isn't giving us a lot of hints there. But that's my review. Hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.